Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, May 22nd, 2020. Time for a Friday show. Friday means getting prepared for yet another stay-at-home coronavirus weekend, unless you are in one of the states that thinks they don't have coronavirus anymore, and you'd like to go out and get it. It's Memorial Day weekend, as it happens, as well. That kind of snuck up on me. If you saw the morning post today, you would have realized that happened to me. Maybe it happened to you. Wherever you are, that one really came up quick on me. I'm used to it being the last couple days of the month, I guess, and so maybe it snuck up a little early because of the way the weeks lay out this time around. But we still have time to prepare, I suppose. I don't know what preparation might be necessary for you. Well, the usual indicators of the approach of Memorial Day were not present for me. I'm usually reminded that it's coming up as the local scout troop gets called out to clean up the local war memorial in preparation for Memorial Day, and setting out chairs and canopies and gathering up donated water to hand out to the veterans and such during the ceremonies on so it would come out on Monday. Do we do the Monday thing, or do they do a weekend? I can't remember exactly when they do it, but I remember the cleanup, certainly, and the assignment of the various duties for the day of, and we're not having it this year. I don't know whether there's a ceremony going on or not. Our area is still closed, so I would imagine there wouldn't be a public gathering like that, but at any rate, the annual, or I guess I should say semi-annual, Memorial Day cleanup didn't go forward, so it didn't get tipped off. Of course, we do it for Veterans Day too, so it does happen twice a year. Anyway, I recently found out that there was a calendar and that we were still following it, so that's pretty good. I guess we have that. Also, ordinarily, we'd have, I'm sure, a lot of places around the country that have access to outdoor activities like the community pools we have around here. Those things are usually slated to open for, it's a nice amenity, isn't it? Open on Memorial Day. And I don't know whether they will. I've seen them out there filling them and putting out the chairs as though we were going to reopen the pools. And who knows? At this point, maybe. Because there's no such thing as public health, as you all have learned recently. Okay, lots to catch up on, of course. Including the fact that I guess Donald Trump was out there standing like a wax mannequin again. I guess in his visit to the Ford plant, where there was some controversy over whether or not he should be wearing a face mask. There's no controversy over whether or not he should be wearing the face mask, but it didn't matter, and he didn't want to do it. But at some point, they did actually have a mask on him, and he made some comments to the press about how he didn't want to give the press the satisfaction of seeing him in a face mask for some reason. I'm not really sure what it is that he is worried about. I know the going theory is that he'll smear his makeup, or that the orange paint on his face will come off on the mask. They gave him a nice dark mask yesterday that I guess was, but I don't know whether that was like the color of his suit or something. But anyway, I don't know whether any makeup came off on it. Didn't appear to do anything to him. The press got a couple photos and ran with him anyway. And then he took the mask off, I guess, to give his speech, which isn't necessarily by itself out of keeping with what other people have been doing when they're on camera giving remarks. It muffles the voice and makes things difficult. I understand the desire not to put the mask on, but anyway, he had made such a fetish of it. I was surprised that some pictures came out with him with the mask on. And then, of course, we got some opportunity to see him freestanding in the middle of open space, which reminds everybody of how oddly he balances himself. Our going theory here is that the lifts in his shoes, combined with his girth and imbalance in how he carries his weight, I guess, is what does that. It's not that, outrageous, but it is a little weird to see, especially when there's literally no one next to him and he's just standing out there. There's a picture circulating from yesterday where, I don't know, he's somehow gotten himself semi-isolated and he's in an area without much decoration. He's on a shop floor somewhere, and he's just pitched so far forward. It's crazy. There was another one circulating of him. Here's the one with him with the mask on that is circulating. And here again, pitched forward, but he also had something else weird going on. He has his hands down at his sides, and he's got like Fred Flintstone hands going on. Have you ever seen full body exposures, illustrations of Fred Flintstone? I guess who illustrated? Was that Hanna-Barbera illustrating that? Maybe they couldn't draw hands. I don't know, but they have him so that he's like got fingers almost like pointing backwards, the hands down at the side, the back of the hands facing front. Just sitting there with nothing with his hands to do, and the fingers just sort of curl backwards, Fred Flintstone style, and that's just one more thing, I guess, to ridicule him with, and why not pile it all up? Yes, Mighty OCD also, thank you, sharing the other theory, which is that I guess Trump was born a centaur and had the back half of the horse amputated at some point, although they left a significant chunk on it, I guess, in the back. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. It's a very weird thing, and he's a bizarre guy, and also he's incompetent to run the country, particularly in our current situation. Just thought I'd throw that out there. All right. Let's see. Oh, yes. Well, hydroxychloroquine back in the news. Everybody talking about it. All the people now trying to cozy up to Trump by pretending that they take it. And I think that's actually what's going on. I forgot to put this away, too. But wasn't there yesterday, all right, a note to self, I guess, here to go searching for it later on so that Scott doesn't have to. But somebody, who was it? Was it James Woods, the crazy actor James Woods? I think so. Who was circulating the notion that... No, I'm sorry. James Woods is crazy, and he is an actor, but he wasn't the one responsible for this. It was Lionel, the guy named for the little electric train sets. He used to be, well, I think he may still have a radio show. He's one of those guys that he was like part of the original Air America lineup. He was on the liberal lineup, but he was sort of a liberal-leaning, almost libertarian commentator, and he like Dennis Miller kind of like went crazy. He fancied himself something of a comedian as well. I don't think he had a life in stand-up per se, but the two of them I put in the same basket because they, I think, both flipped out at some point. I think it might even have been 9/11 that did it to them, and then they became born-again wacko conservative. Anyway, so he may still have a radio show somewhere. They didn't kick him off of Air America because he changed his views. I think Air America failed well before he did that. I don't remember. But anyway, it was his comment that he was proposing that people run around saying they're taking hydroxychloroquine because it would drive liberals crazy, to own the libs, that is. They would say that they were taking hydroxychloroquine, even if they weren't, just to see if they could piss us off. I don't know. I'm not certain whether that's a real thing or not a real thing. But maybe this helps explain this other thing. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do at this point. I have a segment submitted by our good friend from, well, our one good friend. We have several good friends. One of our good friends from Canada. It's Brian Monroe. And it's rather lengthy. And I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to bring it up quickly because I think we have to, in order to get it in before we take the break. I hope this doesn't ruin everything. We got to start now. And this will give me a chance to get to another cup of hot tea that I wanted to get to today. And let me roll this. This may explain some of the hydroxychloroquine and other crazy things that are going on a little bit. A piece that he picked up, and I'll give you the link for it, on the American Idiot. Well, that's not very nice, is it? But it explains itself along the way. Let me get it started, and then some hot tea will help things out, I hope. And maybe we don't even ruin the break. Brian, please.
Yes, good morning, David. I'd like to read an article from a website called Eudaimonia and Company. The article is written by Umair Haque, and the article is called How Freedom Became Freedom in America. Why the World is Horrified by the American Idiot. Avridama, shouted Matteo from across the park. Snowy looked up at me quizzically. It was too early for this, I grumbled, and irritated. What was the Italian doctor trying to say this fine spring lockdown morning? Mate, have you seen this? Ben, the grizzled London copper, asked me, starting to cackle as he handed me his iPhone. There I saw a picture of crowds of people gathered in Central Park, then another on California's beaches with apparently not a care in the world. What the hell is wrong with them? It's not like there's a global pandemic or anything, Ben laughed. You see, added Matteo, Avridama. What the? I began to ask, and then I got it. Freedom, as in, look at what these idiots think is freedom. LOL. Snowy looked at me grinning. My dog park buddies had a pint. Americans, I said, sighing. I struggled for a moment and then gesticulated. All that came out was, they're just different. Ben rolled his eyes. Matteo sighed melodramatically. We know, mate. Oh, we know. The American Idiot is by now a figure that is the stuff of myth and legend across the world. Nobody else is really quite sure. Are Americans really like this? This, well, laughable? Yesterday, they were the kind of people who made their kids do active shooter drills, meaning masked men burst into classrooms and pretend to kill them. What the? Today, they're the kind of people who happily congregate in parks and on beaches during a global pandemic, when the lunatic fringe amongst them isn't protesting for liberation in the first place. What on earth? I don't use the term as an insult, the American Idiot. I mean it in a precise way, as I try to remind people. For the Greeks, idiot carried a precise and special meaning. The person who was only interested in private life, private gain, private advantage, who had no conception of a public good, commonwealth, shared interest. To the Greeks, the pioneers of democracy, the creators of the demos, such a person was the most contemptible of all. Because even the Greeks seemed to understand you can't make a functioning democracy out of idiots. Now, I'm going to generalize, but I don't mean that all Americans are idiots. I mean that, for example, more or less, everyone who wants to carry a gun to Starbucks, deny their neighbors health care, make people beg for medicine online, and not let anyone in society ever retire, all of those people in the world, by and large, are Americans. Nobody else, nobody in the whole world at this point in history thinks such things are remotely desirable. Hence, the American Idiot. It means the world's largest and most hardened subset of idiots at this point in the classical Greek meaning of the world is largely American. You don't have to think very hard to understand why my Italian friend laughed at such a person. We've had many serious conversations over the last few months. How are things in Italy going? I ask, trying to be gentle. He looks away in grief and says simply, difficile. The dogs play. I wonder if his loved ones are okay. He tells me stories of a society pulling together to fight a deadly disease whose toll has been heavy and grave. Is it any wonder that, looking at Americans gathering in Central Park on Long Beach, he's shocked into laughter? We're lucky he's laughing. What he really feels, I'd bet, is a kind of horror combined with contempt, the very same contempt that the Greeks felt for their idiots. Freedom? I bet he thinks more like freedom. When Matteo, when Ben, when every single person I know who's not American, when the whole world looks at America, it sees the American Idiot and what it tries, and usually fails because it's lost for words to express, is something like this. Can people really be this selfish, this oblivious, this thankless? Why do they keep voting for less health care, retirement, education, income, savings, happiness, trust, year after year? Even the so-called good ones? What kind of people? Why are literally the only people left in the world who do that and then complain bitterly about not having the very things they deny each other? Who can even make sense of this? The bizarre circular firing squad of social suicide that America has become. But all those, of course, are key traits of the idiot. The answer, sadly, I think, is yes, people can really be this way. Perhaps because they don't know any other way. Maybe because it's all they've ever been taught or told. That's not an apologia for the American idiot, by the way, or is it? Even, I wonder. Still, let me try to explain as best as I can America's strange and complicated with freedom. One so perverse that freedom became twisted into something very much like its opposite. It has to do with the way Americans think, unsubtly, narrowly, single-minded about what freedom is and means. About a half-century ago, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin divided freedom into two categories. Maybe you already know them. Negative freedom, or freedom from, and positive freedom, or freedom to. The theory then went, and this became the basis of generations of American thought, that only the freedom from was worth developing and cultivating. The freedom to, on the other hand, was vilified as something that only communists and socialists would want. Why? Because my freedom to, say to be educated or to be healthy, requires your input, help, cooperation. But American thinking, which became obsessed with individualism, couldn't admit or permit that, because then maybe you weren't taking responsibility for yourself, and all the rest of the jargon. All this dates back, of course, to Nietzsche's Zarathustra, the Uberman. It's not too hard to see why a society that was born in slavery and continued into segregation, in which horrors like crippling and maiming people for the color of their skin was perfectly all right. Why a society like that ends up prizing freedom from. America's obsession with the freedom from dates right back to the slave owner's desire for freedom from government, intervention, law, common decency, any shred of humanity. To have the power to exploit and abuse human beings is on an unthinkable scale. There's a straight line from Nietzsche's master morality, naturally dominating the slave morality, to Berlin's freedom from any restraint on power. And that straight line is the one American thinking, still backwards, mired in the logic of domination and exploitation, traced. Americans don't like it when I make those links for them, but they are as plain as day. You only really have to look at Europe and Canada to see the contrast. There, the idea of freedom itself evolved, away from freedom from, which is what the early European revolutions were about. For example, when the French abolished the formal class system, freedom from nobility and monarchy and so forth, and towards freedom to. By the end of the Second World War, Europe had done something radical and transformative, written the freedom to into its constitutions. People would now have expansive freedoms too. Freedom to have good health care, education, retirement, income, savings, and so forth. It's true that today's Europe is forgetting about that breakthrough, but it's not true that it wasn't history-changing. The power of the freedom to gave Europe history's highest standard of living in just one human lifetime. Nothing has been seen like it ever before, and maybe nothing will ever again. You might have noticed, though, that I'm still accepting Berlin's old dichotomy, freedom from and freedom to. I reject it. I think the dichotomy itself is a mistake, maybe the formative mistake of American ideas. Isn't good education also just freedom from ignorance? Good health care, freedom from illness, and so forth? I think that a century ago, trying to neatly cleave freedoms into the good kind and the bad kind, American thinking made a huge, terrible mistake, one which trapped it to circle a desert for a century and then find itself in a dead end. You can see that dead end everywhere today, in the cruelty, aggression, rage, violence, hate, which characterized American life as especially brutal. Americans are always trying to escape from any kind of obligation or responsibility to anything. Each other, history, the future, just common decency, even just basic humanity. Who else makes their kids pretend to die and then pretends that doesn't scar kids for life? What the? That's why the world doesn't know whether to be horrified, shocked, repelled, or astonished by America, and it laughs. Nervously, oddly baffled. What Americans don't know is that laughter is the world being polite. Here's how extreme America's belief in freedom as the absence of any kind of obligation or responsibility to anything greater than narrow, immediate, infantile self-satisfaction has gotten. Americans aren't just congregating in parks and beaches during a global pandemic. They're literally the only people in the world who just voted against better health care from Bernie and Liz in the middle of a pandemic. Think about the scale of such folly for a moment. What kind of people vote for worse health care during a pandemic? John Cleese would struggle to make a face that expressed the surreal, tragic comedy of such a thing. But that's what Americans did. What they do over and over and over again. Why? Because they still believe, even if they don't think they believe, in Berlin's tired, weary, flawed old distinction. Freedom has only come to mean the removal of any restraint, negative freedom, on the exercise of individual desire, the satiation of individual appetite. What freedom still doesn't mean in America is any of the following: good health care, retirement, education, and so forth, because what freedom has never meant in any form of collective action. Let me put that more sharply. What if the only way that I can have a decent health care is for you to have decent health care first? What if the only way for me to have a decent retirement is for us all to have one first? You see, that's logic, which is the math of public goods, makes a mockery of Berlin's dichotomy. Then, what we don't need is simple freedom from, some kind of restraint, but freedom to collectively organize, coordinate, take action. Freedom from can give us liberty as individuals. It's true. From kings and even governments, but only the freedom to can give us liberty as societies, groups, classes, nations. These two kinds of freedoms might exist in tension, but try and have one without the other, and the result is a spectacular collapse. Freedom to, without freedom from, gave us the Soviet Union. But freedom from, without freedom to, gave us America, the failed state, the world's first poor-rich country. Gentle Europe, wise New Zealand, humble and kind Canada, which balance the two, have found a kind of miracle in that equilibrium. Matteo and Ben often ask me, what's wrong with Americans? All my non-American friends do, as do everyone's. What they really mean is, why don't they get it? Why can't they change? I tell them that Americans will never really change. They used to think I was kidding. Looking at Americans voting down better health care during a pandemic, then happily crowd parks and beaches. After protesting for liberation from lockdown, they're beginning to believe me. Change? You know about sunk costs, I'm sure. You should let them go, but you can't. Think of a bad relationship. You know you should break up. But how can you let all that investment go? So it is with Americans in freedom. They're too invested in the fool's idea of freedom that wrecked their future to really begin to understand that it is a fool's definition of freedom. They'll go on thinking, in my estimation, that freedom means things like this: carrying a gun to Starbucks so kids can have to do active shooter drills, being able to choose between 1 million health insurance plans, none of which covers you, so that you don't have to pay higher taxes to the hated government, making everyone stand on their own 2 feet, even while every force in society is cutting those very limbs away. Never taking any kind of collective action as a society. That's socialism. That's communism. Those things are bad. They're terrible. No, my friends, Americans will never understand the miracle of European social democracy, of Canadian investment in each other, of New Zealand making a difficult, joyous peace with a broken past. They won't, because they can't, because they don't want to, because nobody teaches them about the gentle and beautiful power in cooperation and dignity, in respect for the self and others as more than a thing of appetite. Because they're trapped by a sordid history, which they secretly care little about overcoming? Maybe in the end, it's just all the above. Freedom. Here I am, the American idiot, carrying my gun to Starbucks before I go to Walmart, where I'll choose between 1,000,000 different flavors of everyday low price, and then I'll dream of being great again while I drive my big car down the big empty highway, listening to some bellowing mullah of capital and individualism and cruelty telling me to hate and enrage a little more along the way. So what if I create my very own exploitation, abuse, misery, decline into poverty, despair, degradation, dehumanization? Hey, don't tell me any different. Isn't that what freedom really is?
No, well, I hope not. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate your giving me the break there to zip in, and get some enthusiasm. True, and I didn't really actually mean to play that, but to get ready for the rest of the day and finish up a nice cup of tea that was pleasant, except it was painful to listen to and hear about how things are going in America, but I think we're all actually pretty aware of it. It just stings a little bit more to hear it coming from Canada. But anyway, all right, I'll include a link to everything. I understand there was a short dropout in the signal there, so you can all catch up on the podcast and miss any of the, or pick up on any of the 5 seconds or so that you might have missed, or read the piece for yourself. I appreciate your giving us the break on a full Friday. We'll be right back to catch you up on all the other things going on around the country. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, a little bit of a weird feeling having given over a significant portion of that first segment. I feel well rested, but thanks, Brian, for reading through that. I know that was a little longer than we like to do our usual segments, but it was a good piece and very interesting and helpful in sort of setting the tone. I want to, we'll pull away from that a little bit and catch up on a couple of other things. We'll do a little bit of an early lightning round to get some things out of the way and get parts of various items out there so that you're aware of them as the weekend comes up. Let's see. Where to go first with this? I mentioned hydroxychloroquine early on, and that sort of led me to the idiot thing. I'll add this piece to the puzzle. Let's see, who sent me this one? I have it, I think, right up here. There you are. Was it Mike Musson? Yes. Okay, Mike sent us the link to this piece, saying, not that this will convince many of those that need convincing, but here it is for what it's worth. A Salon piece by Matthew Rosa, I'm supposing is the pronunciation, R-O-Z-S-A. Here's the headline you need. Longtime hydroxychloroquine user contracts COVID-19. So there is that. Now, I don't know whether people will find basis to reject it, but the deal is this is a woman who had been taking the drug for 19 years to treat lupus, as we had learned was one of the indicated treatments for the drug and what people will actually prescribe it for. So she's been taking it for 19 years to treat her lupus, and she still contracted COVID-19. I don't know if she takes it at the dosage that people have been suggesting for prophylactic use on COVID-19. I don't know if there is a dosage that they've suggested. They just say eat the whole bottle, drink your whole fish tank. I don't know. Hardly matters. But you get what you need from the headline there. I just thought maybe I'll read you the first paragraph or two and see what else we can pull out of this. A woman in Wisconsin, that's what you wanted to know. Where is she? Who's been taking hydroxychloroquine for 19 years to treat her lupus, has a message for the rest of America. Leave me alone, give me my medicine back. But the other message is, I got COVID-19 despite taking the medicine, so you shouldn't assume it will keep you safe. It's just one person. But, who cares? The whole thing is anecdotal to start with. The doctors supposed doctors who supposedly recommend it say, I've treated, a couple of people with it, and they haven't gotten COVID-19, which could also mean they're washing their hands, but whatever. Anyway, the lupus patient who identified herself only as Kim told the local ABC affiliate WISN on Wednesday that she had taken the anti-malarial drug for nearly 2 decades to help manage the pain caused by her lupus. Between that and the fact that she only left her home to visit the grocery store once since the pandemic started, Kim believed she was safe from a possible coronavirus infection. She was doing most of what she should. Anyway, I don't know how she was with masks and hand washing and other people who came to visit and whatever, but okay. That changed in mid-April when she began to experience COVID-19 symptoms, including fever, coughing, and weakness after her oxygen saturation levels tested at 78. Apparently, levels of 95 or higher is normal and what they're looking for. She was sent to an emergency room where she tested positive for COVID-19. When they gave the diagnosis, I felt like it was a death sentence. I was like, I'm going to die, Kim told WISN. That's I'm sure a terrible feeling, and I guess it was because of her pre-existing condition that she felt so vulnerable. Reminder for anybody, I don't know who needs to hear it. I hate that construction. But if anybody needs reminder, you shouldn't regard such a diagnosis as a death sentence. Take it seriously, obviously, but remember that the vast majority of people who come down with the illness do recover, at least don't die. But it can happen, and depending on your vulnerability, and I don't know what other vulnerability she had, I could see why she might be worried about that. Okay. Oh, sounds like we are, Scott tells me we were off again and now return. So, well, that's tough news. I don't know what's causing the fluctuations today. Must be extra demands for extra great internet out there, and they're taking up all of ours. I don't know. It could be anything between me and the West Coast presence of our Netroots Radio operating guts. Anyway, I think we've kind of fished what we need out of this one. It's kind of interesting, though, that this woman who had been taking hydroxychloroquine for 19 years comes down with COVID-19 anyway, and the Q people are probably out there saying, 19, that's the connection. It's not, but whatever. Secondly, I'm sort of interested in, did she think that it might have some actual value? Usually, I would have assumed that the lupus patients who were taking hydroxychloroquine would, I don't know, maybe they would believe the president, maybe they wouldn't. I know they want to reject his message so that the drug isn't hoarded by others. But she does say in her interview that she said to herself, when they gave me the diagnosis, I thought it was a death sentence. And then she said to herself, I'm like, how can I be sick? How? I'm on the hydroxychloroquine. So I guess she must have bought into the idea. Although I suppose maybe as a lupus patient, she excused herself from it. Well, I'm taking it anyway. Now we'll get to test whether the president's theory has any validity. And I guess it doesn't. The doctors said, they were like, well, nobody ever said that was the cure or that was going to keep you safe. And it definitely did not. Well, somebody did say it. It's the President of the United States, and that's kind of problematic. Leads me to another observation from this morning on Twitter, and I had put aside, I think, an article about this, or maybe I just thought it was too. I don't think I could get the mention, or did I put it aside? And it may have been referred to me. I'm sort of scrolling back through the Twitter feed to see if somebody pointed me to this one, and I think that it is the case. But all right, I'm not going to be able to find it all that quickly. But somebody pointed me to an AP article that I took a screenshot of and tweeted out earlier today, alongside an SV Date tweet as well. And apparently I thought it was of interest and important enough this morning to say something about. I noticed SV Date's tweet here that was referencing an op-ed in USA Today by Dr. Robin Armstrong, whoever that is, and SV Date knows. And the tweet featuring the link here just says, Dr. Robin Armstrong, on masks and hydroxychloroquine, as a physician, I know the science supports President Trump. I doubt that that's actually how I would read it, but okay, there it is. SV Date noting maybe this op-ed could more prominently mention that the author is an RNC member. I saw a couple of responses that said, well, it says it at the bottom. Yeah, he's saying more prominently, like at the top would be a good place to do that. Why is it interesting at all? If you suspect that the fact that the doctor is also an RNC member had something to do with coming to the supposed conclusion that the president is right on the science of masks and hydroxychloroquine, you're probably right. I tweeted out alongside it another screenshot of an AP tweet and a link to their story about it from, I think, 2 days ago. An AP exclusive. The tweet says, conservative groups to recruit, quote, pro-Trump, unquote, pro-Trump doctors to support reopening amid the pandemic, countering the advice of public health experts and CDC. A leaked call reveals. So it's a write-up. Not all that surprising, but, it's out there, and I guess maybe this is one of the first examples of it. They are placing op-eds by pro-Trump doctors saying Trump's right on the science, when I think we could all probably guess immediately that can't possibly be true because he doesn't believe in science. All right. Couple of other interesting items to share. I did see this one as I was scanning around for other important news stories to bring you over at Daily Kos. Marissa Higgins writing on the front page this interesting tidbit. As some fight for gyms to reopen, study links 112 COVID-19 cases to fitness classes in South Korea. It's interesting and probably belongs alongside another article that I'm sure is tucked away somewhere in pocket. I'll see if I can't dig it up. But again, that we were doing things exactly backwards, that the demands for reopening somehow landed on some of the highest risk activities. That I guess everybody probably thought that there was maybe, they felt intuitively that there might be something to the idea that all the huffing and puffing and sweating inside of gyms is likely to shed and spread the virus more. I don't know what the word would be here, but just to increase the transmissibility or the transmission anyway of the virus in that environment. And I guess it turns out to be true. It also, like I said, reminded me of another story, an earlier story, that California's study of and tracing of contacts in the early days of the spread of COVID-19 there identified nail salons as one of the clusters, one of the original clusters that caused the initial spread in California. And lo and behold, for some reason, nail salons and gyms end up on the list where people are lobbying the hardest to reopen them the soonest. And that could end up being a disaster. It's just interesting that two separate studies in two separate places found that these two otherwise unconnected environments that people were lobbying to reopen for some reason are particularly dangerous. Figures we would end up doing it backwards. So, all right, that's the basics of the story. It looked like in my quick skim of Marissa's write-up here that it's for the reason you think, that inside gyms and where they conduct these, as they say, high-intensity fitness classes, and people's respiration rates are up and they're sweating. Guess what? It's and also an enclosed space. Yeah, you're going to find an increased transmission of the virus. Somewhere, I guess I'll have to make note to look for that nail salon article from out of California, and I'm pretty sure it's in Pocket, but it will probably take me about 20 minutes to scroll back. I feel like it's 2 weeks old by now and buried under the flotsam and jetsam of those 2 weeks. All right. Switching gears, but only because I'm going to do this chronologically in terms of how things were parked in Pocket. News from the New York Times won't strike you as amazing, but well worth noting. The headline on the piece here: Pompeo quietly visits conservative donors and political figures on State Department trips. It's not entirely unusual for a Secretary of State to be visiting with people who happen to be political figures, but we're talking about domestic political figures. He's not visiting with international political figures. What's going on here? The meetings, often kept off his public schedule, have taken place as Mike Pompeo nurtures plans for a presidential bid in 2024, and he considers a run for the Senate from Kansas. So basically the story is, yes, using taxpayer dollars to conduct the groundwork for the launch of his own future electoral campaigns, flying around on government airplanes, meeting with people on government time. I'm sure the meals that they may share are also paid for by government dollars as well. Entirely illegal and inappropriate. But, you know, everything that the president is doing is entirely illegal and inappropriate, and we can't seem to nail down any willingness from Republicans to enforce the law on that front. So unlikely to come to any fruition anywhere else, though it may be used against him in his future campaigns. Some good detail, I'm sure, offered up by Edward Wong and Lara Jakes on this piece in the Times from yesterday. But, we'll leave it for you to dig up, except for this prominent nugget up at the top, noting that last October he huddled with Charles Koch, the Republican billionaire and longtime supporter of his, of course, and he did this while on an official visit to Kansas aboard a government aircraft. Very interesting. And also some notes on his using international trips for the same purpose on his way out or way back, or meeting with people who happen to be American political players while he's overseas on official business. A big no-no, but no one around to say no in this instance. All right. Other things that ought to be noted. Yes. Well, here's a couple of items from Senate activity over the last couple of days. I've been holding out for the inevitable news of the confirmation of American idiot John Ratcliffe to the job of Director of National Intelligence. You may recall Ratcliffe was originally nominated, and then his nomination was withdrawn when it was discovered that he had been inflating his resume. As I recall, he was claiming responsibility for having conducted some number of anti-terrorist prosecutions. Is that right, or was it anti-terrorist prosecutions, or was it? Actually, he may have actually been prosecuting immigration cases. Didn't he? Maybe both. I don't even remember exactly what he was up to. But he was inflating his resume. Really just astonishing inflation of his resume, as I recall. And it caused them to withdraw his nomination. And then at some point, Trump just changed his mind and said, to hell with it. I want him in the job anyway, regardless. And basically, if you guys in the Republicans in the Senate don't go along with my pick, I will call you mean names and campaign against you or something like that, and rally my troops in support of kicking you out and replacing you with some lunatic. So people went along with it and said, even though it's a bad idea generally to put resume inflators in important jobs, and particularly to put them in jobs where there's a national security angle. I mean, I guess there's some internal logic to it, right? The worry would be if enemies find out that he had inflated his resume, they could use that against him as leverage. We'll spill the beans on the story that you inflated your resume, and you'll be disgraced and forced from the job unless you do our bidding as Director of National Intelligence, which would be extraordinarily dangerous. However, if it's already out there on record, I suppose it can't be used against him. There are other objections, of course, including the supposed requirement that the DNI, supposedly a statutory requirement that the DNI in the statute that created the position have extensive experience in intelligence matters, and he just doesn't. But LOL, YOLO, this is one of those areas where nothing matters. How do you enforce such a law? Well, you have to have the political levers in place to do it, and we don't. So there you go. He's going to be the DNI, or at least it's alleged that he's going to be the DNI. I suppose a guy who has already been caught just wildly inflating his resume, it should be expected that maybe he actually is just doing that again. I don't know. I didn't see the Senate vote to confirm him. I didn't see the president actually nominate him. I haven't seen the paperwork. Demand the paperwork. I'm sure it's there, but how do we know? Maybe he just decided to go out and say he's been confirmed as DNI, and nobody bothered to check. It happened once. Could have happened again. Speaking of this and Senate activity, I also happened to notice this tweet the other day from Walter Schaub. Walt, you'll recall, is formerly the director of the Office of Government Ethics, who has been a prominent critic of the many ethical transgressions in the Trump administration, noting that the people from CREW, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, have picked up on something of note here. Who's writing this? He points to Donald Sherman's tweet here, who tweets under the name of Donald on Ethics. Donald is deputy director of CREW and formerly chief oversight counsel for the Democrats on the Oversight Committee in the House. And Donald, or I guess I could say Mr. Sherman here, but he's referring to his Twitter handles, Donald on Ethics. So CREW's Donald on Ethics, Walter says, lays out the obvious conflict of interest in Mitch McConnell vetting a new inspector general for the Transportation Department, where, of course, his wife serves as secretary. He's vetting a new inspector general for his wife after Trump bounced her acting inspector general last Friday. One of many, of course. But yeah, that's a good point. And, to start with, of course, there's some serious ethical considerations about having a sitting senator's spouse serve in the cabinet at all. But that's old news, and, we've gotten past the fact that that ethical violation will never be examined, at least this particular instance of it, and probably you'll never see a Republican examined for it at all. It'll happen when it happens in a Democratic administration, if it ever happens, and then we'll all remark on how unfair that is and be very sad. Okay, good point, though. And a little weird. All right, let's see. Other things that we can discuss. We'll go back to the COVID-19 question for a relatively, I think, short visit again with our friends the Swedes to see how they're doing. Interesting headline again here, confirming the narrative so far Sweden is still nowhere near herd immunity, even though it didn't go into lockdown. Which I think is probably, the whole thing is kind of misleading. The idea that the Republicans are clinging to this thought that Sweden didn't do anything, and so therefore, it hasn't been the disaster people expected. But I think that we've learned along the way, the plain fact is the Swedes have done almost as much as some of our, let's say, our looser jurisdictions. They didn't close all of their schools, but they closed school from the kids who are like 15 and over, people who are still susceptible to the straight ahead presentation of COVID-19. Now we're finding out the kids are susceptible to a different one. They didn't close down their entire economy necessarily, but they did ask people to work from home where they could, to isolate on their own, to socially distance from one another. It doesn't look like they're wearing masks very widely, but they make much of the fact that restaurants and bars are open, but for the most part, people are sitting outdoors, though they're not, spaced out 6 feet between tables. But they seem to be doing a lot more than they used to in awareness of the disease. And, I guess what we're finding is it's spreading much worse than their neighbors, but it's not a total wipeout. But then again, they're not totally ignoring it, so that shouldn't be surprising. On the other hand, there's the idea that, and the Swedes, I think, deny it officially, that they were going for herd immunity. We keep sort of assigning that view to them, and apparently their scientists reject it and say that's not the purpose of what we were trying to do, which is a good thing because they're not getting there, I suppose, and so now they can avoid that. But anyway, Sweden, it says here in CNN, has revealed that despite adopting more relaxed measures to control coronavirus, only 7.3% of people in Stockholm had developed the antibodies needed to fight the disease by late April. That's a very specific point. It's not necessarily the case that only 7.3% of people have become infected, but they've only 7.3 have developed the antibodies. That tends to indicate, though, that their infection rate is relatively low, which may indicate that a more relaxed approach is possible among a compliant citizenry with mutual respect for one another. And as Brian told us in the beginning, that just doesn't describe American culture at this point. The figure, which Sweden's public health authority confirmed to CNN, is roughly similar to other countries, so no miracle here, that have data, and well below, of course, the 70 to 90% needed to create herd immunity in a population. So a long way to go, if that's really a goal. It comes after the country adopted a very different strategy to stop the spread of coronavirus to other countries by only imposing very light restrictions on daily life. Sweden's chief epidemiologist, Anders Tegnell, hope we're getting close to pronunciation, said the number was a little lower than expected, but not remarkably lower, maybe 1 or a couple of percent. It's actually a considerable chunk, but okay. It squares pretty well with the models we have, he added, while speaking at a news conference in Stockholm. The study, carried out by Sweden's public health agency, aims to determine the potential herd immunity in the population based on 1,118 tests carried out in 1 week. It aims to carry out the same number of tests every 7 days over an 8-week period. Results from other regions would be released later, a public health authority spokesperson said. The country has not enforced strict lockdown measures, and most restaurants, bars, and stores have remained open. Sweden has adopted a different strategy to other Nordic nations during the pandemic. Oh, I think I just read the photo caption. It's in the same font. Okay. Well, anyway, they chose to avoid a lockdown and keep most of the schools, etc., open. It did, however, ask people to refrain from making long journeys, placing an emphasis on personal responsibility. The strategy was criticized, actually, by Swedish researchers early on, who said that attempting to create herd immunity had low support, but the authorities denied that achieving herd immunity was their goal. Now, herd immunity, it says, it notes again, is achieved when a majority of the population, 70 to 90%, it says here, become immune to an infectious disease either because they have become infected and recovered or through vaccination. And when that happens, the disease, it says, is less likely to spread to people who aren't immune because there just aren't enough infectious carriers to reach them, or at least transmitting carriers. I get you. Feels like a slightly different explanation than we've gotten before, but we get the idea, right? No community has yet achieved this, and a vaccine will get us to herd immunity quicker than infection. I think we can all probably agree with that one, and it's confirmed here by an expert who they give credentials for and everything. Sweden's percentage of people with antibodies is not that far off other countries that did enforce lockdown. In Spain, 5% of people had developed coronavirus antibodies by May 14th, according to preliminary results of an epidemiological study by the government. According to Martin Kuba, an official in the Jihočeský maybe region, Jihočeský of the Czech Republic. I'm sure we killed that one. Who spearheaded a randomly selected mass testing for coronavirus among the general public and frontline workers. The initial results there showed that the proportion of the people who have the disease stood at a single-digit % rather than a fraction of a %. So I guess not widespread presence of antibodies, if that's the indicator they're looking for. Let's see. A researcher at the University of Minnesota, Michael Osterholm, estimated earlier this month on CNN, as we're getting ready for our next break, that between 5 and 15% of people in the U.S. have been infected. He said the coronavirus was going to circulate and infect at least 60 to 70% of the population before it slows down, but warned that the country had a long way to go to get to the level of herd immunity. A report he wrote with other epidemiologists and a historian estimated this would likely take 18 to 24 months, about as long as we expect or hope that it might take for a vaccine. There's a bit more, but we'll move on from this particular subject, I think, after the break and catch up with other randomness. Be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. I think we've picked up what we need to know from this. Sweden not getting any closer to herd immunity through whatever means than anybody else, at least not significantly closer. Mighty OCD noting in passing here, you can't get herd immunity without a vaccine. I don't know. I see where you're coming from on that, and or maybe it has to do with the terminology itself. I don't know. But at any rate, I can tell you this. It appears from the CNN report that Sweden's not getting there through their methodology. And, I guess that makes some sense then, given that their epidemiologists, anyway, deny that that's what they were trying to do. Although that's a good public relations position to take as well. All right. So, let's see, the coronavirus worldometer, which, by the way, I should note, I've been noticing probably for going on a week here, they offer up charts, both linear and logarithmic, totaling up the deaths over time and the number of cases over time. And it has looked to me like the slope of the increase in both deaths and cases was decreasing slightly over the past week or two. Cases in particular, it's still a very sharp upward curve, very sharp, but it looks like it's been leaning downward to me. The total deaths looks like it's actually starting to bend a little bit more so than I think the total cases has been a fairly straight line. Once it's gone up, it's continued up, but then I don't know. It looks like it's bending downwards. The total deaths appear to be curving like in anticipation of a plateau, but it's only very, very slight. But I expect we'll see that flatten out at some point. The mortality rate of the disease is still not that huge. The apparent mortality rate is terrible. Because, of course, we aren't able to test the population to find out what the prevalence of the disease really is, and thereby, I think, lower the actual mortality rate. we're only testing people who are coming in sick, and that's going to skew things a little bit. We're still the apparent, what I call, maybe I'm making up the term, I don't know, but what I've been calling the apparent mortality rate is just straight up division of the number of people who've died from the disease in the numbers in the worldometer tally divided by the number of people who we've tested and found to be positive with the disease. I don't know if it's an interesting number to epidemiologists. I'm just thinking of it in terms of statistics. You want that number to be going down and not up, or at least not hovering. And ours was going up, up, up. It was always above 5%. More than 5% of the people who we were diagnosing with the disease through testing were eventually dying of the disease. And it's, it was terrible numbers and awful outcome. And then, of course, to be out there saying, well, we think the real mortality rate is lower than 1%, considerably lower than 1%. If you're sitting at 5, it's embarrassing. And it just kept creeping up from there. And it was going up, 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 up constantly for a while. But for the last 2 to 3 weeks, it's hovered steady, except it's hovered steady at 5.95%. It's never hit 6, but that's not the place you want to be sitting. Of course, over in the UK and some of the harder hit countries in Europe, it's been hovering at or above 10%. And I did see it noted another way of looking at things, and I saw somebody tweeting about it just yesterday, is the Worldometers charts also talk about outcomes, and we know how many people we have tested positive for coronavirus. We know how many people have died from coronavirus. We also know how many people have recovered from coronavirus, and therefore how many are still active cases of coronavirus. So I don't know exactly how they're keeping or gathering those records, but they're out there. And according to those numbers, among cases that have resolved in one way or another, that is, they've either recovered or are dead. That's the only two outcomes that you can have once you have the coronavirus. Among people who have, for whom there's an outcome, an end to this, 20% of the resolved cases resolved in death. That is also not very good, and it also should not be understood to be the mortality rate, and you shouldn't panic. Even the woman who's taking hydroxychloroquine and got COVID-19 shouldn't think of it as a death sentence. And it's indicative of nothing in particular, except that this disease takes an awful long time to resolve itself. And I think this is something Greg has mentioned from a slightly different angle, somewhere along the lines. Well, when we were trying to determine what's happened with some of the reopenings, reminding us that a reopening isn't going to result in an immediate spike, probably, of additional cases or additional deaths. And if it does, it will be because those cases and deaths existed before the reopening, because of how long it takes for the disease to incubate. Once it's contracted, once the virus is contracted. But in addition, it takes several weeks for cases to resolve themselves. Even people who come out of it, quote unquote, just fine, at the other end, it can often take weeks, sometimes weeks in the hospital, more often weeks at home, but sometimes weeks in a hospital at a greater expense, just to be able to say, all right, we've seen this case resolve itself. And then there were some question marks about whether they resolved themselves because did the people have antibodies? Could they catch it again? Some people who tested positive after testing negative at long last. So there's all kinds of mystery on the other end of this thing. But it was a remarkable thing to point out. And for a while, Sweden had the same problem, and a far greater number of people whose cases resolved in death than in recovery. They were running 70-30 the wrong way, that 70% of the resolved cases were deaths. And they've since flipped that back, just sort of noting for the record. And where do we stand today? I'm watching, where's Sweden in the standings of the world here. Of course, we now stand with U.S., Russia, and Brazil in 1, 2, and 3 spots here. The 3 countries in the world with more than 300,000 reported cases. Of course, we're way ahead with now 1.6 million cases plus, and standing this morning at 96,389 reported deaths, poised to go past past 98,000 today, I would guess. And slow reporting over a holiday weekend, but somewhere in between now and Monday, we'll get an official word that we've topped our 100,000. So that'll be a sad moment, and an appropriate one, I suppose, for Memorial Day. Anyway, also creeping up in the stats, as I mentioned yesterday, the number of countries topping 100,000. Also of note, and still increasing at a relatively dramatic rate, are deaths per 1 million population. As I recall, the first time I took note of that statistic, the United States was in the neighborhood of 170-something deaths per million in population, and that record is somewhere out in the tweet threads that I maintain on this thing, so I can check back on it. But we're now at 291 deaths per million, which, by the way, puts us, I was looking at this the other day, if you can reshuffle these charts, and I mentioned that some of the micro states, San Marino and Andorra, had some of the top numbers in deaths and total cases per million population because of the size of their population. But everybody's sort of creeping up in the stats here. Sweden stands at number 8 in deaths per million, now at 389 deaths per million population. That puts it behind France, the UK, and then Italy. Italy, of course, one of the early epicenters where their numbers were just horrific, it seemed, had 537 deaths per million. And, that's pretty frightening. Sweden still relatively far behind at 389, but creeping up. And our numbers not looking all that fantastic either, but putting us at 12th or so. And if you get rid of the microstates of San Marino, Andorra, and I guess St. Martin as well, that puts us at number 9. So in the top 10 in the world, and it's a little worrying. Brazil making a big charge, though, in terms of total cases. And they had looked poised possibly to pass Russia in the next couple of days, but Russia put up some big numbers yesterday. Not to be outdone, but I think Brazil may end up passing at least the official totals reported from Russia, and that may raise questions about how they're reporting more than anything else. All right. Also of some interest, I did note yesterday this tweet thread from Carl Quintanilla, who's an anchor in the NBC universe there, anchor on CNBC, and I guess non-anchor, but reporter for NBC News, reporting this J.P. Morgan study yesterday. It says here in his tweet, J.P. Morgan has a devastating piece, I'm not certain what's devastating about it, arguing that infection rates have declined rather than increased in states where lockdowns have ended, even after allowing for an appropriate measurement lag. Pardon me. Wow, that frog really crept up on me. I don't know what's devastating about that exactly. I thought it would supposed to be encouraging. Maybe he thinks it's devastating for people who think that we're opening up too quickly, but I don't know. But I'm not really certain what we draw from this one because, what it tells you is everybody's been opening relatively cautiously. Even where they've done it quickly, I think they've at least required scaling back to 50 and sometimes 25% capacity in the restaurants, and they try to favor the outdoor seating. Some places are opening with indoor seating. And I know it was a bad idea to open the gyms and nail salons, etc., but they do have, PPE requirements and some spacing requirements. And so if infection rates have declined, I'm not certain exactly what it means given that they have all of these restrictions, but rather I guess that restrictions kind of work. The tweet thread continues, same goes for various countries. This means that the pandemic and COVID-19 likely have its own dynamics unrelated to often inconsistent lockdown measures that were being implemented. We were experimenting, trying to figure things out. In the absence of conclusive data, these lockdowns were justified initially, but millions of lives were being destroyed, I wouldn't quite put it that way, with little consideration that lockdowns might not only cause economic devastation, but potentially more deaths than COVID-19 itself. And I think there the thing sort of goes off the rails. But then gets accusatory. Demagogues will be tempted to use COVID-19 to blame immigrants. That's true, they will. People of a different race, or use the pandemic as a pretext to intensify geopolitical tensions. We will closely monitor how these risks evolve, I guess passing no judgment on those particular demagogues. And demagogues is not a part of their quote either. I guess Carl Quintanilla added that one. The initial response of the administration was to downplay the risk of the epidemic. However, since then, this simplistic thesis changed significantly. The administration shifted to forecasting a larger negative impact, setting the stage for them to outperform, shifting the pandemic blame to China and the World Health Organization, and blaming the economic pain on large blue states that are perceived to be slowing down the reopening. Okay. So I think they're laying the political charges probably where they belong. But I thought it was interesting to point this out as somehow devastating, and probably would have benefited, I think, from noting that even the states that are opening are at pains to demonstrate that they're opening cautiously, even if they really could be a lot more cautious, quite honestly, and would make a lot of us feel better if they did. I think there was another comment that this had prompted for me yesterday morning, and I think if I scroll I might even be able to find it, but now offhand I'm not certain whether we hit that point or not. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting that it was weird for them to characterize it as devastating. I thought a devastating report. I think I think we're almost there. Yes, right. Oh yeah. So phased reopening at 25% capacity and behind masks is arguably effective. Yes, right. This was when we were talking to Greg, and I was saying, yeah, but Trumpsters still don't take yes for an answer, right? We say opening restaurants at 25 to 50% capacity, making people sit outside. Everyone should go around wearing a mask. Carl Quintanilla says that J.P. Morgan says that there hasn't been a spike in infection rates. So Trumpsters take that as, yes, let's do this with no restrictions, and I should not have to wear a mask. Like, let's make things worse. I'm not really sure why that follows, but it's only because, I guess, attribute it to American idiocy, I suppose. All right. Moving on to some of the other subjects. I guess we're going to scroll way back here. Just a couple more random COVID-19 notes, because we're all preoccupied with that. And as we try to figure things out and ponder our situation over the weekend, I thought I might add this piece from The Guardian. Luke Harding, writing this last Friday. You see how far back in my scroll I've gotten here. This piece titled Weird as Hell, and it really is, but in this case, Weird as Hell, the COVID-19 patients who have symptoms for months. This is the sort of thing you should keep in mind, I guess, if you're talking with somebody who you think can be reasoned with, who says, look, it's got a 99% survival rate. What's the big deal? You get a cold, and if there's still people in the it's just like the flu camp, and you think they're persuadable. And I don't know if that's really an overlapping set of circles in a Venn diagram anymore. But if it is, or if you're just interested in what the hell is this disease anyway, this is an interesting addition. Researchers, the subheader says, Researchers keen to work out why some people are suffering from long tail form of the virus. Of course, still a lot of speculation out there about which form of the virus, which version of the virus you might have gotten, and whether there was a difference between the one on the East Coast and the West Coast. Also, that reminds me of another note. This article I don't have, but my wife had seen it the other day, and maybe I can scrape it up from her, but noting that apparently researchers in Israel had been studying, I guess, the DNA, or I guess RNA, the genetics of the virus that was present in Israel, and found through that and contact tracing that some significant, way significant percentage of the infections in Israel had apparently, according to contact tracing and genetic studies, been brought to the country by visitors from the United States. Fantastic. So we are super spreaders and giving people our own particular form of the virus. And I don't know whether it was West Coasters or East Coasters and which one spread it in Israel. But I guess maybe they'll find out and figure out. Maybe they, too, will be able to help us tell whether the East Coast and West Coast got different versions of the virus or whether its impact is determined by our own genetics. In mid-March, this story says, Paul Garner developed what he thought was a bit of a cough. A professor of infectious diseases, Garner was discussing the new coronavirus with David Nabarro, the UK's special envoy on the pandemic. At the end of the Zoom call, Nabarro advised Garner to go home immediately and self-isolate. Garner did. He felt no more than a little bit off, and that's good. Days later, he found himself fighting a raging infection. That's the way infections go. Sometimes it's one he likens to being abused by somebody or clubbed over the head with a cricket bat. The symptoms were weird as hell, he says. They included loss of smell, we've heard about that one, heaviness, malaise, tight chest, and racing heart. At one point, Garner thought he was about to die. He tried to Google fulminating myocarditis, oh my goodness, but was too unwell to navigate the screen. Sounds bad. Garner refers to himself wryly as a member of the Boris Johnson herd immunity group. Not sure exactly what he means by that, but okay. Did he get it from Boris Johnson, or was he a believer in the herd immunity thing? How could he be a researcher in infectious diseases and believe we'll get to herd immunity safely? I don't know. Or maybe he thinks I was infected around the same time as him, and we have nothing to do with one another, but I'm part of the herd now. Anyway, this is the cluster of patients. It's actually explained. Why didn't I just keep reading? The cluster of patients who contracted COVID-19 in the 12 days before the UK finally locked down. All right. He assumed his illness would swiftly pass. Instead, it went on and on. A roller coaster of ill health, extreme emotions, and utter exhaustion, as he put it in a blog last week for the British Medical Journal. I've been wondering about the emotional impact of both this and self-isolation, etc., and whether, like I said with Greg yesterday, whether this accounts for, in some part anyway, for the number of crazy videos we're seeing of lunatics just losing their minds left and right in public over trivialities. But I think that we were likely having that happen all the time anyway, and we're just beginning to capture more of it on video. But it still may also have been increased by this, especially if he's noting extreme emotions as a symptom. I don't know if I've heard that one. There is growing evidence that the virus causes a far greater array of symptoms than was previously understood, and that its effects can be agonizingly prolonged. In Garner's case, for more than 7 weeks. The professor at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine says his experience of COVID-19 featured a new and disturbing symptom every day, akin to an advent calendar. He had a muggy head, that's an interesting description, upset stomach, tinnitus, pins and needles, breathlessness, dizziness and arthritis in the hands. Each time Garner thought he was getting better, the illness roared back. It was a sort of virus snakes and ladders, or as you and I probably know it, chutes and ladders, but okay. It's deeply frustrating. A lot of people start doubting themselves, he says. Their partners wonder if there is something psychologically wrong with them. Okay. Scott sent me a piece here, too. Let me get ready to open and pocket that one. What's the deal here? China's new outbreak, oh dear, shows signs the virus could be changing. Well, we do know about the volatility and ability of the virus to mutate and evolve, but we'll see if we can't figure out what's going on in that one. Thanks, Scott. All right, let me pocket this for now. Their partners wonder if there's something psychologically wrong with them. And I've been wondering that about some of the people we've seen in these videos lately. What if they're all ill? Since his piece was published, Garner has received emails and tearful phone calls from grateful readers who thought they were going mad. I'm a public health person, he says. The virus is certainly causing lots of immunological changes in the body, lots of strange pathology that we don't yet understand. This is a novel disease and an outrageous one. The textbooks haven't been written. And he's too sick to write it, I guess. According to the latest research, about 1 in 20 COVID patients experience long-term on-off symptoms. It's unclear whether long-term means 2 months or 3 or longer. The best parallel is dengue fever. Do I have that pronunciation right? Garner suggests a ghastly viral infection of the lymph nodes, which he also contracted. Is he a viral disease researcher or just a collector? I'm not sure which. Dengue, I think that's right? Deng or Deng? D-E-N-G-U-E. You all have, I've seen it written, so have you. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Well, dengue comes and goes. It's like driving around with a handbrake on for 6 to 9 months. Wow, don't want that. Professor Tim Spector of King's College London estimates that a small but significant number of people are suffering from the long tail form of the virus. Spector is head of the research group at King's College London, which developed the COVID-19 Tracker app. This allows anyone who suspects they have the disease to input their symptoms daily. Some 3 to 4 million people are currently using it, mostly Britons and Americans, because English, I guess. Spector estimates that about 200,000 of them are reporting symptoms which have lasted for the duration of the study, which is 6 weeks. There's good clinical data available for patients who end up in the hospital, or as they say, in hospital. Thus far, the government is not collecting information on those within the community who have ostensibly mild but often debilitating symptoms, a larger group than those in critical care. It's mild by comparison, I suppose. Debilitating doesn't mean mild to me. These people may be going back to work and not performing at the top of their game, Spector says, and that might mean working from home. Don't panic just yet. There's a whole other side to the virus which has not had attention because of the idea that if you're not dead, you're fine. He adds, we are the country that invented epidemiology. Is that so? We haven't produced any epidemiological studies other than the app. It's kind of embarrassing. They're all sick. Don't be too hard on yourself. Can't invent everything. As more information becomes available, the government's COVID model seems increasingly out of date. Many COVID patients do not develop a fever and cough. Instead, they get muscle ache, a sore throat, and a headache. The app has tracked 15 different types of symptoms, together with a distinct pattern of waxing and waning. I've studied 100 diseases. COVID is the strangest one I have seen in my medical career, Spector says. Scientific explanations for what's happening are still at an early stage. Lynn Turner Stokes, professor of rehabilitation medicine at King's College, said COVID is a multi-system disease, which can potentially affect any organ. It causes microvascular problems and clots. Lungs, brain, skin, kidneys, and the nervous system may be affected. Neurological symptoms can be mild, anything from headache to severe, like confusion, delirium, or a coma. Turner Stokes says it's uncertain why the illness is sometimes so protracted. One explanation is that the body's immune system goes into overdrive with an ongoing reaction. Another is that the symptoms are virus-driven. Either way, she says, there can be a recrudescence, is that right? Wow. Of symptomatology. Give me a couple more big words in that, why don't you? Or, as she also puts it using more colloquial language, the whole caboodle comes back. That I can pronounce. All right. Speaking of the whole caboodle coming back, we need to take our short break, and I think we're going to be done with this article. There's only a short paragraph left, but never mind. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, you know what? There were 2 short paragraphs left, and we might as well just wrap it up here on the Guardian article. I said never mind, but we should read them. Researchers are now collaborating across borders. They are examining the latest data from European countries ahead of the UK in pandemic terms, such as Italy and Spain, as well as China. They are seeking to work out what support may be needed for severe and chronic patients with COVID posing similar challenges to HIV and AIDS a generation ago. Meanwhile, COVID long-termers have been comparing notes via a Slack support group. It has a 60-plus days and a 30-plus days chat group here, and the dominant feeling is relief that others are in the same grim situation. I guess I can see that, and that their health problems are not imaginary. So there's at least that, and you guess you can reassure yourself that you're not imagining things just because you are sick for far longer than the news led you to believe you would be. If it's happening to you, it could very well be real, and you'll find others experiencing the same things. That's a new angle on things. There's a bit more. Let's see what it was. That I don't want to scroll all the way back to the top because then I'll lose my place here. But perhaps I can open up 1 or 2 other things and then get back to it. And then I can go and see what it was that Scott had sent me from Bloomberg News. Sharon Chen, is that correct? Yeah, let's see. All right. Well, you gotta scroll a while to find the actual meat of the article here in their format, but in the pocket format comes up very differently. All right, well, at any rate, the piece says China's new outbreak shows signs the virus could be changing. Let's see what the change is all about. This is from yesterday's Bloomberg. Chinese doctors are seeing the coronavirus manifest differently among patients in its new cluster of cases in the northeast region compared to the original outbreak in Wuhan, suggesting that the pathogen may be changing in unknown ways and complicating efforts to stamp it out. Patients found in the northern provinces of Jilin, I'm guessing, and, oh my goodness, what is this? Heilongjiang, maybe I got that right, appear to carry the virus for a longer period of time and take longer to test negative. This according to Qiu Haibo, one of China's top critical care doctors on state television on Tuesday. Patients in the Northeast also appear to be taking longer than the 1 or 2 weeks observed in Wuhan to develop symptoms after infection. I had a feeling that was lengthening. We've heard a couple of reports about that. And this delayed onset is making it harder for authorities to catch cases before they spread. said Q, who is now in the northern region treating patients. Let's see, a couple of stats here we'll skip over. Second waves, it says in this next section, that are hard to trace. Oh, I'm sorry, this is going to be a different story entirely. You can't tell what they're doing with this here, but this is one of the links to one of their other stories. Second waves that are hard to trace. Plague Asia's virus recovery is the name of the other story. Similar, related anyway. The longer period during which infected patients show no symptoms has created clusters of family infections, said Q, who was earlier sent to Wuhan to help in the original outbreak. Some 46 cases have been reported over the past 2 weeks, spread across 3 cities, Shulan, Jilin City, and Shenyang, in 2 provinces, a resurgence of infection that sparked renewed lockdown measures of a region of over 100 million people. Scientists still do not fully understand if the virus is changing in significant ways, and the differences Chinese doctors are seeing could be due to the fact that they're able to observe patients more thoroughly and from an earlier stage than in Wuhan. When the outbreak first exploded in the central Chinese city, the local healthcare system was so overwhelmed that only the most serious cases were being treated. The northeast cluster is also far smaller than Hubei's outbreak, that's the province that Wuhan is in, which ultimately sickened over 68,000 people. Still, the findings suggest that the remaining uncertainty over how the virus manifests will hinder governments' efforts to curb its spread and reopen their battered economies. China has one of the most comprehensive virus detection and testing regimes globally, and yet is still struggling to contain its new cluster. Researchers worldwide are trying to ascertain if the virus is mutating in a significant way to become more contagious as it races through the human population, but early research suggesting this possibility has been criticized for being overblown. In theory, some changes in the genetic structure can lead to changes in the virus structure or how the virus behaves, said Keiji Fukada. Might have ruined that one. Director and clinical professor at the University of Hong Kong's School of Public Health. However, many mutations lead to no discernible changes at all. It's likely that the observations in China don't have a simple correlation with a mutation, and very clear evidence is needed before concluding that the virus is mutating, he said. Now, I'll pause at this point to note also yesterday's tweets, and we'll try and dig those up, that apparently the Montgomery, Alabama area, I'll just make my notes here, Montgomery, Alabama area has basically topped out in its availability of ICU beds. Lots, of course, of the rural hospitals serving rural Alabama are long since closed. Various policy decisions and bad ideas behind that. But in other words, if you're sick across much of rural Alabama, and you find yourself in need of a hospital bed, ICU or otherwise, you'll be brought to, in all likelihood, Montgomery, if you're from that part of the state, for your care. And apparently the mayor of Montgomery, in a press conference, saying, yeah, they're basically out of ICU beds. If you get sick now and need intensive care for COVID-19 or anything else, doesn't really matter what it is, you will have to find your way or be brought over to, I guess, the Birmingham area, if you're going to stay in state at all, to find an ICU bed, and who knows how long that's going to last. So in other words, all of what the stupid coastal elites were worried about when the virus hit the rest of America might actually be coming true. For all the people who, including the governor of Alabama, who said, well, we're not those coastal elites. We're not California. This isn't going to happen to us. Might be wrong, because it's all proportional. You have far less population, obviously, in Alabama, and far less concentration in Alabama than you do in California or New York, but you also have far fewer hospital beds and ICU beds, and it's easier to run into problems when your healthcare system gets swamped. But whatever, you're not us, so okay. Good luck. We can't really just write it off like that, because We're humans, and we don't do that. Republicans do that. And I realize that's what's predominant down in Alabama, but there's also a lot of people who live under the heel of the Republican boot, unwillingly, and who vote very much the opposite direction, who are probably the most likely to come down with the most severe cases and need the most intensive treatment as well. Sort of point that out before we abandon them. All right, back to the article on China, though. Q, remember him? The Q people love him, I'm sure. He says that doctors have also noticed patients in the Northeast cluster in China seem to have damage mostly in their lungs, whereas patients in Wuhan suffered multi-organ damage across the heart, kidney, and gut. Interesting. Officials now believe that the new cluster stemmed from contact with infected arrivals from Russia, which has one of the worst outbreaks in Europe. Genetic sequencing has showed a match between the Northeast cases and Russian-linked ones, said Q. Among the Northeast cluster, only 10% have turned critical, and 26 are hospitalized. China is moving aggressively to stem the spread of the new cluster ahead of its annual political gathering in Beijing, scheduled to start this week. As thousands of delegates stream into the capital and endorse the government's agenda, China's central leadership is determined to project stability and control. So, interesting parallel to our own conventions as well. The Northeast provinces have ordered a return of lockdown measures, halting train services, closing schools, and sealing off residential compounds, dismaying residents who had thought the worst was over. People should not assume the peak has passed or let down their guard. Wu Anhua, a senior infectious disease doctor, said on state television on Tuesday, it's totally possible that the epidemic will last for a long time. And we have been getting that warning for a while, too. So add that to your collection of weird and wild and disparate stories from around the country and around the world on coronavirus. All right, let's see. Having read that one, let me throw it back even further to mid-May. The 14th, so just over a week ago, this Seattle Times piece, another piece in the puzzle of when the hell did the United States actually get the coronavirus and where and how. This picture becoming more muddied and more confusing with every such story. The Seattle Times, when did coronavirus really hit Washington? 2 Snohomish County residents with antibodies were ill in December. Okay. Let's take a look at this one. Lewis Camb, K-A-M-B, writing this one. And by the way, it's L-E-W-I-S, Lewis. So have fun trying to find that one. Okay. You know, you'll be able to get it right. She came down with a bug 2 days after Christmas. And for the next week or so, Jean, a 64-year-old retired nurse, suffered through a series of worsening symptoms. A dry, hacking cough, we heard about that one, fever and body aches, and finally a wheeze that rattled her lungs. But after 2 trips to the doctor, chest x-rays, and prescriptions for several medications, including a Duo-Neb solution inhaled through a nebulizer device commonly used to treat asthma, her condition slowly improved. You can see how if it is indeed a mistake to regard this as a respiratory illness, you can see how the mistake was made, right? At least with the early cases. Months later, after the novel coronavirus pandemic had exploded across western Washington, the nation, and into American consciousness, Jean and dozens of others like her have wondered if their early winter colds really were undiagnosed cases of COVID-19, the illness caused by the virus. But her case didn't seem to fit the profile. The symptoms did, but she hadn't traveled abroad, and the official timeline was off. The first known patient infected by COVID-19 was a Snohomish County man who'd recently traveled to China, and that wasn't even confirmed until more than 3 weeks after she became ill. When I got sick, I didn't even know what COVID-19 was, said Jean, a resident of rural Snohomish County who asked only to be identified only by her middle name. But after Jean received word from her doctor earlier this month that a highly touted serology test found a sample of her blood positive for antibodies to COVID-19. She's now convinced the official timeline is wrong, and public health officials say she might be right. Jean is among 2 Snohomish County residents who have positive serology tests potentially linked to COVID-like illnesses dating back to December, throwing into question whether the coronavirus arrived in Washington and the United States earlier than previously known. Although neither case offers ironclad proof of that, an antibody test can't pinpoint exactly when someone was exposed to the virus. Each patient's test results, combined with clinical symptoms in December, appear to meet the Federal Centers for Disease Control's case definitions for COVID-19. They are being considered probable. Heather Thomas, a Snohomish Health District spokeswoman, said in an email back on whatever week that was. However, they are not captured in our case counts from January 20th forward. After the Seattle Times asked about Jean's case this week, the local health district said it had a second positive antibody case involving a person who showed symptoms in December, but provided no further details. Thomas said the district's health officer, Dr. Chris Spitters, is planning to talk about the cases during a Friday news briefing. I don't know what the results of that were, but a brief report accounting for all the district's known reports of positive antibody tests, about 30, would be issued, Thomas said. The 2 cases provide more circumstantial fodder to mounting doubt among medical doctors, research scientists, and others that the Snohomish County man who tested positive on January 20th is the purported patient 0 who introduced the coronavirus to the U.S. The man had been traveling solo since November in Wuhan, China, where the outbreak appears to have originated. He returned to the Seattle area on January 15th and days later began showing symptoms. My own guess is that there wasn't one introduction or one patient 0 who brought the virus to the United States, said Dr. Art Reingold, a public health epidemiologist at the University of California at Berkeley. There were likely earlier and multiple introductions of the virus. Because the virus's undetected spread in Washington and elsewhere predated broad testing in the United States, a definitive timeline for the COVID-19 related cases and deaths remains in question, scientists say. Already, studies in other nations have poked holes in what previously were thought to be starting points for the virus. Researchers in France recently found a COVID-19 case dating to December 27th, nearly a month before that nation's first previously confirmed case on January 24th. A genetic study published by researchers in Britain this month also found evidence to support extensive worldwide transmission of COVID-19, likely infecting people in the U.S., Europe, and elsewhere weeks or possibly months before some of the first reported cases in January and February. The amount of air travel into and out of Wuhan was enormous. Probably thousands and thousands of people, Reingold said. It follows that there was likely multiple introductions around the world, quite possibly in December. It is very interesting. The possibility that this timeline is longer, although really would have to be much, much longer. But I wonder what, if it's confirmed, a longer history for the virus, if it was, say, circulating in October, November even, or rather the other way, November, October even. What does that do for comparisons to the flu? Just in terms of, I mean, again, it's a different kind of virus, etc. But now that we're looking at, we've been saying, well, the flu doesn't kill 50,000 people in a month. It kills 50,000 people over the course of an entire flu season, which can sometimes last as long as a year, for certain outbreaks anyway. What if we aren't looking at a month's worth of disease, but rather 6 months worth of disease, and it's just taken until the 5th month for spread to really ramp up? I mean, that's the way exponential growth goes. It's just a slow, long, not tail, but a slow, long foot, I guess, to it in the beginning, and then the big outbreak. But if we add months to the timeline, I wonder if that changes our view of things. I mean, it may for the sake of comparison to the flu, but still you need to treat it, exactly as public health authorities are warning you to treat it, and stop comparing it to the flu. But maybe later it becomes a little bit more sensible to think of it that way. I don't know. Continuing on here, there's still a bit more to go. Likewise, a timeline for COVID-19 related deaths in the U.S. has been pushed backward. A resident of the Life Care Center of Kirkland who died February 26th was initially believed to be the first death, but retrospective autopsies of 2 people in Santa Clara County, California in April revealed that each had died from the illness earlier, with the first death occurring February 6th, so almost the entire month, right? At least 3 weeks earlier. That discovery prompted California Governor Gavin Newsom to direct local medical examiners and coroners to investigate whether COVID had claimed anyone in the state even earlier, as far back as December. Washington State also has reviewed some cases of those who died from pneumonia or respiratory illnesses, but so far hasn't found anything that predates the first confirmed COVID-19 case in January. State Health Officer, that's the State Health Officer, Dr. Kathy Laufey, who was responsible for that conclusion. The King County Medical Examiner's Office retrospectively tested 20 bodies in its morgue, but none were confirmed positive. Public Health, Seattle and King County, said it's reviewing medical records for some individuals who may have contracted the disease early this year. Medical examiners and coroners elsewhere in the state are considering retrospective testing of tissue and blood samples from earlier cases, but so far nothing. Local and state public health officials also say they don't have much capacity to investigate whether individuals like Jean, who received positive antibody test results, may have had COVID-19 earlier than the first known case. It's always interesting to go back and find out how things have started, but it's hard to put those pieces back together, Laufey said. I think a lot of our focus now is on the current spread of the virus and stopping new transmissions. As far as including positive antibody tests and daily case counts, public health agencies in Washington don't yet appear to be on the same page. The CDC's case definitions note serologic methods for diagnosis are currently being defined, and we see what happened with the case counts there, but also list someone with positive serology tests as a presumptive case. That means to be formally counted, the person must also have had certain clinical symptoms at some point or close contact with a confirmed or probable case, details that require additional investigation to find out. Local health jurisdictions are encouraged to investigate patients with positive antibody results if they have the resources, but those investigations are not required, said Department of Health spokeswoman Lisa Strom-Warren. Still, DOH said it now counts antibody tests as probable cases, but the dates reported for them may be varied based on when the test results came back or when the symptoms or ties to other cases occurred. The Snohomish County Health District, or rather the health district itself, has received other reports of positive antibody tests, but case investigations on those are a lower priority in follow-up. Okay, I think we've got pretty much the gist of this. And let's see, what does Jean have to say about her symptoms? Just saying, other than a bad cold, I didn't get sick any other time. Ah, yes, so she's trying to determine for herself, isn't it possible, I guess she's asked, that you had something else when you were sick in December, and then you picked up the coronavirus and developed the antibodies to it afterwards, that is to say, after the first reported case in the area. And it is possible, but she does say, other than that bad cold, I didn't get sick any other time. If I didn't get the virus then, I can't imagine when I would have gotten it. And it is hard to believe that you would react so strongly to some other bug and then come out of a coronavirus infection as an asymptomatic sufferer. But I guess anything is possible. Okay. I think we'll break away from this article at this point and see if there are any other quick items for inclusion. I'll try and find access to that article about what happened with the disease in Israel at some point and include that in the roundup too. Too late to get into any of the interesting articles about Trump's inattention to intelligence briefings, but I think that's kind of old news for us at this point. Let me add this one. Here's, I got one or two quick items that deserve inclusion as you think about what's coming up in the weekend. Kate Sherrill shared this idea, this theory from Helen Kennedy, who you may also follow on Twitter, a newspaper reporter previously with the New York Daily News and Boston Herald, who tweets out this conspiracy theory, but it's an interesting one, and would likely be wise to keep an eye on. Switching subjects here to Kelly Loeffler. The theory runs this way. It's a quick 4-point plan here. Loeffler dumps her stock. That's step one. Her husband, now, as it turns out, has given $1 million to the Trump campaign, or one of the super PACs connected, or not connected, as they like to say, with the campaign. Very interesting. And then step 3 here, Trump's shady attorney general takes the Loeffler insider trading probe away from New York City, where they were investigating it, and brings it to the same D.C. prosecutors who are gutting cases against other Trump pals like Stone and Flynn. And step 4, of course, here is profit. That's easy enough to figure out. So $1 million to Trump's super PAC, America First Action Incorporated, an activity in technical terms we call a kickback, right? If you make these illegal sales, but pay a chunk of the illegal gains to the chief law enforcement officer in exchange for, either dropping the case or handing it over to friendly prosecutors who are known to do these sorts of things for friends of the Donald, then I guess you get off the hook. So keep an eye on that one. We'll find out what develops there. Another Walter Schaub alert that I had put away. He tweeted in all caps back on Wednesday, the 20th, noting the another one of the Inspector General situations, saying here, I repeat, I didn't catch it the first time, it is illegal for Trump's acting IG to have started working at the State Department this week. Remember that the law forbids removal of an IG during that 30-day notice period. If even four Senate Republicans cared about laws, they would stop this by blocking Trump's nominees. Got it? Well, apparently they don't, because the DNI was confirmed just yesterday. So I suppose that's the answer for Walter Schaub. But yeah, we heard the other day that, the State Department IG is being fired. Well, not really. There's a 30-day notice period. Well, they've already pushed the acting into starting work at the State Department, which is apparently illegal, and yet here we are with nothing going on to stop it. Okay, one more thing I'll throw in there about the crazy people overreacting to, or acting out emotionally during the coronavirus crisis, and the possibility that they're driven to it by the illness itself. Here's a note from the folks at The Trace, Jennifer Maschia, who, as I recall, was she Joe Nocera's assistant when he was cribbing the gun fail idea from us? Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, she's working over, I think, at The Trace, the gun activist, anti-gun, and I guess they would, they might accept anti-gun activists, but that's what the pro-gun people call them, is anti-gun, but they're pro-safety activists. But this is interesting. People keep shooting each other over coronavirus restrictions. So I was wondering about that the other day, as we heard another case of yet another person asked to put on a mask in some public place and then reacting by shooting the person who asked them. This is becoming a problem. People keep shooting each other over coronavirus restrictions. They've been tracking gun violence tied to face masks, store closures, and social distancing rules. I think they're kind of overcounting in my quick scan of what they've got here, but they put the number at 9. And not just the dollar store security guard who was shot and killed over a mask dispute, and this other person who shot a cook at a Waffle House restaurant who asked him to put on a mask, but I guess more, although some of them are less immediately obvious as connected cases, I guess, but you're here for your review. and I'll include that in the roundup, and you can take a look at them and see what you think about them. Let's see, shall I include for your reading the ProPublica piece, Two Coasts, One Virus, how New York suffered nearly 10 times the number of deaths as California. Another theory on how that happened, and perhaps some thinking about whether or not it's a different form of the virus or whether we just have different dynamics among the populations there. Lots more to get to, but that's what we have another week for, right? Weekend comes up for us now, but first, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, who will be able to bring you his roundup of everything that he's got on tap for you. Let's see, what can we pick out that looks especially juicy before our announcement? Well, the answer is nothing before our announcement, but what about afterwards? How about you come back after this brief statement and I'll see what I got for you.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, how about this stuff? The Michigan flood has raised fears that toxic waste has washed into Lake Huron from a Superfund site in Midland. And the FDA reported that the E. coli lettuce outbreak in late 2019 came from cattle grazed near the California farms. Okay, so blame the cattle for that one.